Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Summer of Sport, a BookTube event created by Mark at Book Time with Elvis. He's no longer making BookTube videos, but it's a great event where we read sports-related literature for the whole of the summer. I've had a lot of really good discoveries, a lot of weird rabbit holes that I've gone down, a lot of fun stuff like that. And yesterday, in the mail, I got a book. No idea who sent it to me or why. It's not new. It's from 2022, and it's self-published. I did a cursory check of my correspondence to see if maybe the author was in touch with me. I didn't find anything, but I get a lot of emails in one day. A lot of them, hundreds of them. So I might have missed it. But the book is this: The Legend of Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. It's by Howard Burnham, and it has these busts of these three famous baseball players on the cover. It's a well-designed thing, has blurbs on the back, looks exactly like something you would find at the trade paperback releases of your bookstore. There are none of the usual justification or spacing errors that happen, I hate to say, very often in self-published books. There's a bit of a problem here that I would have fixed if the author had been in consultation with me, but it's the same kind of problem that I find in mainstream published books, which is that The Legend of Willie, Mickey, and the Duke is a subtitle. It's not a title. A title is supposed to evoke. It's supposed to grab your imagination. It's not supposed to immediately settle down with the potatoes and the peas and start describing the book. It's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to evoke. It's supposed to be imaginative, and this is not. But that is not a fault of self-published books at all. And this is a story of Duke Snider and Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays. Three great baseball players, all playing relatively at the same time, relatively the same place, relatively the same kinds of circumstances. And yesterday I said, I glanced at it. I saw a lot of dialogue, and I said, oh, so it's a novel about these three great baseball players. That's not true. It's not a novel. What it is will be an active question. This is exactly the kind of subject that I absolutely love to just talk to you all about. What I absolutely love, one of the things I love about BookTube is that I have this enormous resource. I have these 1,000 dedicated readers that I can pick your brains. I can bounce things off you. I can ask you questions. I can ask you, do you agree with something that I'm saying or not? And you can then agree if you know what's good for you. Leave aside the part that I can send you stuff. That's fun in its own right. This book definitely raises a subject that I can talk to you about and ask you about. Because I saw all that dialogue and I thought, oh, this must be a novel, but it isn't. It isn't. Nothing in here didn't happen. Some of the things in here are a little bit leaps of faith by the author, but they are the most informed leaps of faith imaginable. They're not quite leaps. They're tiny little jumps of faith. This is the story of these three men and their baseball careers from the beginning all the way to the end. We follow them out of the game, into retirement, and to death. And it's wonderful. I don't know how I came across this book. I'm assuming that the author watches this channel and took it into his head to say, well, I should send him my book. It's not brand new, but he's going to open it and show it to 1,000 dedicated readers on YouTube. That kind of publicity I don't get anywhere else. I should send it to him. It's worth the postage. If that's true, I honestly don't know why every indie author doesn't do that. I honestly don't. Especially if you're talking about a BookTube channel like over 5,000 subscribers, where it could be a substantial outlay for you, a substantial payback for you to do it. I honestly don't know why you wouldn't. If the person's address is readily available, and I have since learned, that my mailing address is quite readily available online. That's no problem with me. As my lawyer often says, whether you do something illegal to someone you know or to someone you only know online, you're still doing something illegal. He always gets this hungry gleam in his eyes when he says that. So I'm not all that concerned about it. I don't understand why more indie authors don't do this. Maybe it's just that most people in the BookTube world aren't readily available in the mail. You would have to confer with them and get a mailing address. The horrible senior moment here, part of this whole thing, is that maybe this author did that, and I'm just not remembering. But I don't know why the author did this, but I'm so glad that he did, because this is so good. It is so good. It is so involving. It's not hero worship. And these three men they led lives that make for exciting chapter by chapter reading. There's no need to fictionalize. There's no need to add in drama here. Their lives are already dramatic. I would say probably of these three, Willie Mays is the most heroic and probably technically the best player, but and Duke Snider, nobody outside of baseball knows, but Mickey Mantle is probably the star of this book. Probably he is. And it's terrific. The whole of it is just terrific. The author is fantastic at evoking places. He's fantastic at narrating baseball action. Fantastic at taking these men off the field and into their complicated, desperately unhappy private lives. Just wonderful. Just a fantastic book. So this is indie published. You're not going to see it in your bookstore, especially now that it's 2 years old. You're not going to see this in your bookstore. If you're a baseball fan, you're going to love this book. If you know a baseball fan, they're going to love this book. But I don't know who sent it to me. I don't know why. I don't know how I got this. But if the goal was to get this crusty old critic to cry this thing from the rooftops, it worked. And it wouldn't have worked with a bad book. Well, maybe in Garbogast it would have worked with a bad book. But it had to have been a particular kind of bad book. This is not a bad book. This is fantastic. This is exactly the sort of thing that I always used to tell my colleagues in the mainstream reviewing world, who would scoff at the fact that I was regularly going out of my way to read lots and lots of indie books. They would scoff at that, and I would say, it's crazy to scoff at this anymore. If you're not paying serious attention to the indie world, you are missing good stuff. Just a mathematical certainty that you are. Now, my contentions along those lines here on Friday nights for Wine and Calzones were strengthened considerably when a mainstream publisher picked up Sergio de la Pava's Naked Singularity, which had been exactly one of those indie books that flew completely under the radar that I read and that was fantastic. It is a great, great novel that my colleagues were ignoring because it's just this indie junk. Some of them had to eat a measure of crow when that book became a success, when that author became a success. It's happened plenty of other times as well. I, of course, am not saying that that's going to happen with this book, but it deserves your patronage. If you're at all interested in the subject, it deserves your patronage. It's a terrific book. But there's a thing about it that I want to discuss. The author makes a note of it himself, so I'm not picking on him. Certainly I'm not. Because I said that he reconstitutes dialogue. And that although he doesn't make leaps of faith, he makes little jumps of faith. And that's true. He does. I want to read you his opening caution to the readers. It's an author's note, but really it's a caution. Because I want to know what you think of it. Just as simple as that. I'm just nosy. I want to know what you think of it. And I think that when you get to the end of this note, you're going to be able, those of you who've been here a long time, are going to be able to guess what I think of it. This is his author's note, which I don't think he would mind if I read the whole of it. I don't think that's infringing on his copyright. I think that it adds to his book saleability. It shows you what kind of an honest mensch you're dealing with here. This book is a work of faction, a portmanteau of fact and fiction. So not split segments of a political party, but that a different meaning for the word faction. Many words have been written about and by Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, and Duke Snider. Wherever possible, I have used those words, which have been carefully attributed to their sources. But in some cases, I have created dialogue or scenes that are consistent with what we know to be factual. These dramatizations do not come at the expense of the truth. For example, in his autobiography, Snider wrote of the day at spring training when he realized his career was almost over. Quote, "I was left behind when the Dodgers played games in the other parts of Florida." Close quote. My factionalized account might have read, and then we get a quote. This is a passage. Duke is in his room at the Dodgers spring training facility, Dodgertown, in Vero Beach, Florida. He has finished shaving and is gathering his gear to go out on the field when at 8:30 the phone rings. It's Buzzy Bavasi, sorry. Duke, I need you to head over to the minor league field. Aren't we playing the Mets over at St. Pete? Duke asks, surprise evident in his voice. I'd like you to stay behind. Get some at-bat with Spokane. The game starts at 9, so you'll need to hustle. I don't understand. We won't need you today against the Mets. Better to go get some work done in the minor league field. Message sent. Message received. That's the passage. So you see, you get that one line in Duke Snider's autobiography. And Berman takes that line and fleshes it out into a scene. He's read everything about the men involved here, the men on both ends of the phone, and he's estimating what that conversation would have been like. Is it a dramatic license? Yes, it is, because the conversation is not recorded. Duke Snyder doesn't record it, and Bavasi doesn't record it. So the details of that conversation are not recorded. Is this probably what it would have been like? Yeah, this is probably what it would have been like. Notice there are no dramatic excesses at all. Bavasi is not calling Snyder any names. Snyder is not resorting to off-color language. There's no yelling. There are no threats. There's nothing that might impinge on the record. There's nothing that the author might have to take back if, for instance, a transcript of the call were to surface. But hey, I don't want to load the deck because I have a million questions for you. The author's note goes on just briefly. I haven't made up stories about Willie, Mickey, and Duke. Just as simple as that. Just a flat statement. I haven't made up stories about them. I have taken the stories that have been reported either by the men themselves or by others, reporters, columnists, biographers, family, teammates, friends, fans, and set them in dramatic scenes, much like one would encounter in a film or a novel. Consider these factionalized accounts as springboards for the imagination. And then he's done. Then the author is done. Then you are on to chapter 1 of this book, where he has explained his methodology here. I don't think he would be completely comfortable with this book being called simply a novel. Because when he mentions that mention there of reporters, columnists, biographers, family, teammates, friends, fans, he knows what those things are. There's this one thing that comes clear in this book. It's the vast amount of research and knowledge that this author has. He's read all those things, or heard them. He's done a vast amount of research. He's just decided to tell the book in a different way. And my question for you is, what do you make of all that? This has come up before on this channel. I have praised many times, for instance, Alan Eckert's book, A Sorrow in Our Hearts, about Tecumseh. Eckert takes the exact same approach in writing his books. Eckert, for instance, if you had talked to him when he was alive, would have said that his entire frontiersman saga, all those historical novels that you will see, that you used to be able to see in your bookstore in the historical fiction section, he would have said none of them were fiction. He would have said, sure, I invented conversations when letters only alluded to them, but they are the conversations alluded to by those letters. And I've checked those letters and double-checked them in the archives in 10 different states. So, yes, I put quotation marks around them, but I didn't fictionalize anything. That's what this author is saying. He's saying the same thing. He's saying, if I say that Mickey Mantle was in a certain place, if I say that Willie Mays was up against a certain attitude in a certain town, he was. And I can lead you straight to a long list of sources that say that he was. All I'm doing is dramatizing that. And you all know, if you've been with this channel for any other time, you know already what I think of this. I have praised A Sorrow in Our Hearts, for instance, but far more importantly than that, far more centrally than that, I have praised Livy, the Roman historian Livy, who is my all-time favorite. I absolutely adore him, and that he does that left, right, and center. For God's sake. I could go even further back. Herodotus also does that. In Livy's case and in Herodotus' case, they will both say the same thing to their reader, and often do. Livy wrote a whole tract on it that doesn't survive, but there are warnings still all over the parts of his book that do survive, which is that you cannot say that I am telling stories. That's exactly what this author says. I am not telling stories. I have not made up any stories about these men. I've just made what we have into stories, but only what we have. I am sure that on any given Monday, on any given Sunday in this book, I am sure that where this author has Willie Mays is where Willie Mays was. I'm 100% positive of that. The whole thing just breathes with verisimilitude. So what I want to know is, you all know where I stand. I love Livy. I love Alan Eckhart. I love these authors. I love Herodotus. I don't mind this at all. If the author comes off as trustworthy, if I get the feeling that the author is not lying to me through the facts, as often happens in this approach. If I have that feeling, if I have the feeling I can trust the author, I think I can trust this author as long as the day is sunny, then I don't mind at all. Maybe I'm willing to admit that maybe we need a different name for it than either history or fiction. maybe I might be willing to admit that, because the Germans gave us the formal discipline of history, where you theorize only when you don't have facts. And if you don't have facts, you clearly mark that you're theorizing. The Germans taught us how to handle sources, in other words, how to document what you're doing. And that doesn't allow for invented speech. It doesn't allow for that kind of change that we saw, where you take that line in that autobiography that maybe 20 people alive today have read, and you change it into that scene. I think that change works perfectly in the hands of a responsible person, but a lot of people, maybe a lot of you, will say, no, absolutely not. The minute you do even a little bit of that, it's fiction, and you just have to call it that. So what do you make? Where do we stand on this subject? Since the authors, well, whoever was kind enough to send me a copy of this book, it was on my mind the whole time. I was on my mind, especially as I got to the end, because the stakes go up and up in this book. More and more is on the line. These guys are all phenoms, and then they become institutions. Then they have to battle with management and crowds and fads and the changing times, and especially all three of them, their most inexorable stalking enemy, age. So the stakes just get higher and higher in this book, and as the stakes were getting higher and higher and those dramatic elements were still interweaving with the narrative, I was reading on the bed and I was thinking, I am totally at ease here. I'm totally at ease. You can raise the stakes all you want. If I can take Livy doing this for the Second Punic War, I can take it for baseball. But at the same time, I was naturally wondering about all of you. What do you make of this? If you read that note, that author's note by this author, would you then be able to enjoy this as a work of nonfiction? Would you consider it a work of nonfiction, or would you be able to enjoy it as a work of fiction? Or would that note just ruin it for you? I would love to know. I'm hoping that it doesn't, because you would miss a really good book. But I want to know where we all stand on this. Just how firmly are we planted in the Germans' corner here? Or are you willing to allow for a little bit of blurring of the lines there? This author, for instance, he is saying, I didn't make up any stories about these guys. I'm giving you them. I've read their letters. I've read their autobiographies. I've read and talked to all their friends, all their surviving family members. I know them inside and out. I'm not stepping out of line for their character. I know how to do this. And yet he's giving it to you in the drapery of fiction. We could compare this to a very, very famous recent example, which would be the Cromwell books of Hilary Mantel, where Hilary Mantel has also done an incredible amount of research. The more you know about Tudor England, the more you will see when you read those books how much research she did. You won't need to. You won't need to at all. You could know nothing about Tudor England and still love those books. But the more you know, the more you'll see that she was there ahead of you and does know what she's talking about. And sometimes her characters quote from primary sources, but she very much has a narrative agenda. She wants you to like and admire Thomas Cromwell. Two things that were impossible to do in real life. She very much wants that. So she is using the artifices of fiction to make a point, to sway you to a viewpoint. That's not happening here at all. When Hilary Mantel does it to such an extent that there's no way possible that she could not have called those books fiction. And by the same token, Durbin McCullough, in his huge biography of Thomas Cromwell, which I cannot recommend strongly enough, what a book, he's perfectly willing to admit when the facts don't follow him. He won't follow the facts out onto a limb. He won't jump after them. Here are the facts, and I can speculate on the facts, but I'm not going to fill in any blanks. It's not my position as a biographer to do that. So you've got those two ends of the spectrum of Cromwell. This author decides that's exactly where I belong, right in the middle of those two things. And plenty of historians have thought that way. Thomas Carlyle's book, The French Revolution, I praised it a million times. He does that. Livy, of course, does that nonstop, and plenty of others. So where do we stand on this? Thing number one about this little summer sport video, go and buy this book. Go and buy this book. If you're a baseball fan, or if you know a baseball fan, don't miss this. And I guess, parenthetically, thank you to whoever sent this to me. I still have not found you in my email, but thank you, whoever it was. But thing number two, what about that? What about that author's note? I get to pick your brains on the subject. I'm such a lucky person. Tell me about that author's note. Where do you stand on this? Would you jump right into this, even though the author's saying, I changed this line that I'm giving you into this scene that I'm giving you. That change that I read you, is that permissible? Does that ruin your reading experience, or are you perfectly okay with that, provided the author isn't holding an ace up his sleeve? I want to know. Tell me all about it. Oh my God, summer of sport. I'm going to try another sports book tonight, but this was an unexpected curveball. So I don't know where we're going to go after that. But I had to share it with you. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. So I'll wrap this up for now. I will try not to make the remainder of summer of sport the summer of baseball. I'll try not to be such an ugly American that I do that, but it's mighty tempting. Anyway, I'll wrap this up and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.